a little bit of helpful information on what your stance should be and how you should feel in a situation. So I just wanted to start off with the fear of Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constantly mentions to us that we should fear Him alone if we are believers. So inshallah, that is what we all aspire to be. So what does that mean in these situations? If we look at the Sahabi and what they used to go through, do we think they weren't afraid? Of course they were afraid. They would be afraid, but here's where the difference is. Well, either, subhanAllah, some of them may not be at all, but the difference is that even though we might be afraid, our fear of Allah is more than our fear of anybody or anything else. In fact, if we have the correct level of trust, of tawakkul and hope and fear in Allah, then we wouldn't have any fear regarding anybody else, because we would leave our situation in the hands of Allah. I do know that we all don't always act like this, so what I mean to say is that put that fear aside. The more you correct your mindset and the more you bring your fear back to the fear of Allah and not what these things can do, that is going to help your situation a lot more. So how do you do that? So you might feel afraid of the possession. You might feel like, I don't want to do ruqya because something's going to come out of me and that's scary, or something might start talking, or I don't want to do ruqya on my sister or my husband or somebody because they start going crazy and it's going to attack me, and things like this. And things like this run through our mind generally in the ummah, and some of us are, subhanAllah, some of us are want to sign up to be Iraqi, and some of us can't even talk about it without getting scared. So, but when you come across this situation, unfortunately, Allah's put us in a situation where we do have to deal with it, and you do have to deal with it if you want to get better, inshallah. But straight off the bat, the first thing I want you to think is, if I come in this situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only gives me burdens that I can bear. So subhanAllah, straight away you think, Allah knows that I can handle this situation, and He knows me better than I know myself. So that means that, genuinely I can handle this situation. And when you look at the situation as coming from Allah, which everything comes from Allah, all our hardships come from Allah, then He is the one that we should be asking, and He is the one that we should be fearing, and He is the one that we should be asking for forgiveness from, and inshallah our cure will come quicker. And also, if you know the hadith, I have put it up, that says that nobody, not even a whole nation, not even if all the men and all the jinn of the world were to come against you, to harm you, it is only by Allah's will that we ever have benefit in anything, or we ever get harmed by anything. So if you look at a situation and you've got this sihr and this possession going on, you don't look at it like the jinn is getting me, the jinn is doing this to me, I need to fear the jinn. You need to think of that Allah is testing me, this is coming from Allah, so I should fear Allah, because these jinn, they have no power over me except for what Allah has willed. The only reason this jinn can do this to me, the only reason this jinn can cause this miscarriage, is not because the jinn is this amazing being, is because it has come from Allah, and this is a test from Allah. And if Allah willed, they could not do anything to me. So therefore I should fear the might and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is able to do all these things, and He is able to do everything. And it's ironic, because every time we read Ayatul Kursi, it talks about the sublime being that is Allah, and how He has complete control over all of His creatures. But then in our mind we don't make that link, and we read it but we don't apply it to our daily life, and we forget. And that is what we're like, we forget in the actual situation to think like this. And that is the difference. That is what the believer does, and that is what we need to emulate as well. That is what we need to do, me included, which every time we come across this situation, backtrack and think, who am I fearing here? And you also need to remember, you need to think about the day of judgment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching us, and He is testing us, and He's going to see, who do we fear more? Did we really fear Allah alone, or did we fear His enemies that if we had asked him for refuge and if we'd asked him for protection, he surely would have granted it to us. So who are we fearing here? And who should we fear? And in the Quran as well, it mentions that the difference between the believers and the kuffar was the kuffar feared the believers, whereas the believers feared Allah. And that was what they didn't understand. So what are we doing? Which one are we doing? And once we get that down in the situation, then you will get that courage, inshallah. And then another way of getting this courage, I call it the courage of Iman. So the more you're reaching out to Allah, because you understand that Allah is the source of all our hardships and He's the source of all our blessings. Once you realise it's all coming from Allah and you start asking for protection, the more of your adhkar you do. So if you're doing your morning adhkar and you're doing your evening adhkar and you're making du'as and you're making supplications, if you're actually doing these and you're constantly protecting yourself, you naturally, subhanallah, you actually do start to feel a lot less afraid and there's a lot more courage. I don't know the wisdom behind this. It obviously is supplications by the will of Allah, and it's a blessing. And it may also be that consciously we know that because we've done these, we are likely to be a lot more protected than if we didn't do them. SubhanAllah, of course we are, but it may just be our mindset as well that we do know now that, okay, I did them today. So I would say the more you do, the easier you will feel, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with these supplications that they do protect us. So we should really be using them. I mean, especially in the face of our enemies, they're not friendly bunch. They're going to pull out all the stops that they can. They're not going to stop, and the shaytaan is, whether you're possessed or not, are always on our case, and we've been given these supplications, so we should really use them. And it's a means of reward as well, inshallah. All of this is a means of reward. It's a matter of perception. So the same way, once you've changed your perception and you direct it to Allah, and you don't start focusing on the shaytaan as much, and you don't start just worrying, oh my God, this is happening to me, and that is happening now, and this is happening now, what do I do? And you've made some dua, but you haven't really thought about where's all of this coming from, or why is it happening. Realize that it is a source of reward, and realize that on the day of judgment, the people who didn't go through trials in this life, they're going to wish that they did. So hold fast, have your courage, and even if you are feeling afraid, remember that your fear of Allah is greater, so then you act. So even if you did have fear, you still acted, and you still acted according to the commands of Allah, and that is still fearing Allah more than them. Once you begin to not do something because you're afraid of them, that's when you don't fear Allah the amount that you should. So say if you saw, if the jinn said something like, I'll go if you don't read this salah, or I'll go in your name and not in the name of Allah, and all these things like that. Or you saw something scary, or you're not doing the ruqyah because you're afraid of what is the jinn's going to do, or what's going to happen in the ruqyah, then you're not fearing Allah as much as you should, and you fearing them more, because it is stopping you from carrying out the commands of Allah. But on the other hand, if you are afraid and you've seen something and you think, okay, that scared me, but I'm going to read the Ayatul Kursi and put my trust in Allah, then you're fearing Allah more, because you know that Allah is the source of all power, and He is the being that we should be most afraid of, and He's the being that we should seek protection from. I hope this video has been beneficial. Please send through more advice, any more videos that you would like to see, inshallah, just to help the ummah. Asalaamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.